I found that the teachings within Stoicism have been a metamorphic force within my worldview and outlook, to the extent that I would now refer to myself as a Stoic. No, I'm not that guy from How to Train Your Dragon. Stoicism is a belief system that started in around 300 BC in Hellenistic Athens. Its intention was to help individuals avoid suffering by living a life of apatheia, objectivity, and by exercising self-control. There are several themes within Stoicism, and most of them find their roots within the first, which is to understand what is in your control and to understand what is not in your control. What we cannot control are things such as external events, other people, our bodies, our reputation, history, and pain and pleasure. It's important to understand that although we can influence these things, we don't have complete control over them. Take our bodies for example. We can eat healthily and exercise, but regardless of what we do, we will still fall sick, we'll still get injured, and we will still inevitably die. So what is it that is under our control? We can control how we perceive events, we can choose what we believe about said events, and we can choose how we respond to those events, and that is to say we can control our own emotions. Epictetus, a Stoic teacher that was enslaved in his youth, thought that emotional problems stem from two critical mistakes that humans make. The first is trying to exert some level of control over things in the first sphere. We insist that something in our external lives must be a certain way, and when it proves to be impossible to change that thing, then we tend to feel frustrated and angry. The other was failure to take control over their beliefs and thoughts, the one thing that they can truly control. Rather than taking the onus on themselves for how they feel, they use something in the external world as an excuse or a medium of blame, saying they had no choice because X or Y. This isn't to say that you shouldn't try to manage something that you can't completely control. All it is simply saying is don't place your happiness or your identity on your ability to change that said thing. Marcus Aurelius is actually a pretty good example of this. No, not him. Not him, that guy, yeah, him. He worked to make the world a better place, but he never based his happiness on the results because he understood that the results are out of his control, which leads us on to understanding our emotions. Now this is actually my favourite tenet of Stoicism, and it's what got me doing deeper study into it. It's interesting to note that this Stoic teaching is essentially what underpins all cognitive behavioural therapy. Cognitive behavioural therapy. I can't even speak. It often seems that our emotions just happen to us, that they're an automatic and involuntary response to a stimulus. Let's say I'm walking down the street and I encounter an impeccably slow walking person, a topic I have covered before in a video. I often find myself incredibly irritable and explosive at that moment, as if it's an immediate response to that person. But if I examine this more closely, I interpret this stimulus in a particular way. My interpretation is that this person is an imbecilic excuse for a multicellular, bipedal, cognitively sentient proto-ape. And it's this interpretation which leads to me feeling frustrated. It's the judgment that upsets us, not the thing itself. It is only once we realise that our emotions are dictated by our interpretations and our beliefs can we truly objectively scrutinise them. And by this we can ascertain that many of our disruptive emotions are based on irrational or false beliefs. It's from this very idea that Stoics get labelled as an emotionless bunch. It's not that Stoicism teaches us not to feel, simply that we must think about our emotions before we give assent to them, allowing to control our more negative emotions. The idea that we should engage ourselves in daily mental exercises such as contemplation, meditation and reflection is very prevalent within the Stoics. One such activity that came as sort of a curveball to me was to meditate and dwell upon your own death and the death of loved ones. I thought it was somewhat sombre and macabre to dwell on inevitable demise, but once this initial disconcertion left, I understood the reason for such a practice. It allows us to have a greater appreciation of the present and focuses our perspective onto life's priorities rather than focusing on trivial matters. If you take a short moment to realise that your loved ones, being your parents, boyfriend, girlfriend, auntie, uncle, cousins, grandparents, goldfish, dog, cat might die tomorrow, it makes you feel somewhat compelled to enjoy the time that you have together to the fullest. And when something like that is your priority, you don't tend to care as much for whether or not your bank account is as cushy as you would like, or whether or not your eyebrows are on fleek. Another exercise that I found to be somewhat cathartic is known as view from above. View from above. View from above. If you're feeling that minor annoyances are causing you to feel stressed or irritated, simply cast your mind onto the infinite vastness of our universe. This cosmic perspective makes any annoyance that you might have seem infinitesimally insignificant, and shows that you literally just made a mountain out of a molehill. Bringing your mind back to the present moment is a technique that has similarities with the Buddhist practice and is somewhat related to the reflection thing I mentioned first. I'm sure there have been times when you have been greatly worried about the future. You students studying for summer exams should know exactly what I'm on about, and dwelt on things that have made you miserable in the past. Seneca once said to one of his friends, if I were to paraphrase, "What is the point in bringing up the sufferings of the past? Why make yourself miserable now by reliving what made you miserable back then? By bringing yourself back to the present, you are refocusing yourself back into life's priorities, rather than stirring up emotions that should have been deconstructed long ago. These are just a few exercises that are meant as a means of cultivating right thinking, freeing ourselves from the vices of extreme optimism and extreme pessimism, and replacing it with a more realistic expectation. If there's anything I'd want you guys to take away from all this, it's just to stop whining. It's so easy for us to complain about things, but it's mainly because we feel somewhat herded by our emotions. Once we realise that emotions will not pity themselves, we can simply just move on and proceed with our lives. I'm still very much on the journey of understanding, but in the relatively short time that I've studied Stoicism, my mindset has changed and impacted my life for the better. And who better to share my passion of this topic with than you guys? Hanonle Melonin.